maybe we could start if you talk a little about the films that you show us.
Oh, about the films?
Yes, yesterday. We can start by that.
What would you like to know about them?
How does it goes with your work? I mean, if you can speak the relation about the films and the books.
Yeah, as you might imagine, I get asked that a lot.
Yeah.
But from the very beginning, when I first started making work in the late 70s, I was already, working in film theory as well.
Yeah.
And it never once occurred to me that there was a difference between the two activities.
Yeah.
That it always surprised me that people thought you either had to be a theorist or a filmmaker, but you couldn't be both.
Yeah.
Because even when you've seen my work is very conceptual, as one might say.
Yeah.
And whatever problems obsessed me in my writing, in some respects also obsessed me in my film and video making, such that the film and video making was just another way of expressing those ideas.
Okay.
Right? That in a sense, the idea was the same. For example, when I was a very young student, I was fascinated by Jean-Louis Baudry's article about the ideological effects of the basic apparatus. And he talks about time at the level of the film strip.
Yeah.
And so I asked myself, what happens when you make that time visible? How do you make that time visible? We were talking about time yesterday.
Yeah.
And it was finding this little device called an intervalometer that I could attach to my Super 8 camera.
Yes.
That would automatically control the frame rate from 1 frame a minute to what have you.
Yeah.
And so, that's a very simple way of explaining it, but it for me it's too, like writing and video, it's two different materials for thinking. I'm thinking with both of them.
Yeah.
I was going to say something else about that. And it's funny because we were talking about analog video yesterday too.
Yes.
And it's like I couldn't think about time with analog video. It was just continuous time. How can I?
There's no frames.
Yeah, there's no frames.
Yeah.
Or not the right kind of frames.
But one thing that we saw yesterday, I saw yesterday in your films, you talk about the frames, and we're talking also about the continuous movements. But there's no frames in the sound. I mean, sound is continuous.
Yes.
It's continuous.
Yes.
So you have duration, you have time and sound. That's something that gives a counterpoint.
Yeah.
And not the image.
Yeah.
So how they come together.
It was really important to me when I made this fabulous discovery that I could take these discontinuous images but have sound in real time.
Yeah.
One thing is that I really like having this kind of unseen yet documentary presence, because the sound is truly documentary sound. It is recording, it's documenting all the sound around the camera that is not visible. Usually because I'm not pointing it at people.
Yeah.
Already notice the absence of people in my films, except my feet occasionally.
Yeah.
But it sets up a whole set of dialectical relations for me, because in the 1 frame a minute film, you have this staccato, very basic rhythm.
Yeah.
That's intervals, but then next to it you have this continuity.
Yes.
And the sound is very important for me, not just for the document, but as I was saying yesterday, yes, it's 1 frame a second, but it's still movement. There's various kinds of movement. It's not, someone who's not looking closely, who doesn't understand the process, would say, oh, it's a slideshow of still images. But they're not still images. It's movement captured at intervals of 1 frame a second.
No.
And having the sound continuous under it helps one understand better that there really is a set of complex dialectical relationships between continuous sound and discontinuous image.
Yes.
That's really important for me in most of the films.
Yes. Now I see that you have a time measure in sound.
Hmm.
You really have a block.
Yeah.
And you don't have a time measure in your image because you don't have continuous movement. So
Yeah.
it's not time. It's not movement image.
Yeah.
So.
And the other thing, when I find the films work, because I mentioned yesterday, there was a period in my life when I made hundreds of these things. I mean, I would gather hundreds of these things, but I've never counted them, but there's only about 20 that I'm willing to show people of that kind of work.
Yeah.
But the other thing I look for is, I mean, even though you have that standard beat, 1 frame a second, I'm very attentive to what kind of rhythmic relationships occur within the image, because they aren't still images.
Yeah.
There's duration within those captures.
Yes,
of light that's blurring, of space that's distorted, and so the sound is one kind of rhythmic relationship.
Yeah.
The beat is one kind of rhythmic relationship.
Yeah.
But I'm always looking for, are there overtones or a counterpoint happening visually in terms of the other visual material that's being captured.
Yeah.
Because I didn't show a film like that, but also often in my walking series, you hear my feet on the ground,
Yeah.
which is another rhythmic element. But I'm always, actually, I think very musically. Somebody else was asking me why I mentioned Terry Riley and Steve Reich. When I'm planning these works, I think about them, being a musician as well, very musically, and think about time as a complex rhythmic process in which there's rhythm, there's counterpoint.
Yeah.
And that has to be there, or I think the work is not strong enough.
Yeah. No, my point is that the sound is anchor
Yeah.
in the world, is anchor in the take, in the prise de vue, and the image is, I don't know.
You're too much of a realist.
Yeah, that's really true.
Because actually, because I'm actually writing an essay now, which is because like I said yesterday, if my films were completely abstract, I would think they were a failure. But if they're completely, they're not. If they were completely figural,
Yeah.
I wouldn't be happy. So what if, the world that we see
Yeah.
is a very, very teeny tiny slice
Yeah.
of the universe.
That's the point
And-
of your films. Yeah.
And so what happens if you saw the Bergsonian,
The whole.
the Bergsonian universe of universal variation? What would it mean to think of, the matter that surrounds us as
Yeah.
that, what Deleuze and Bergson call flowing matter. Ernie Gare has some wonderful films like that too. It's a film called Glider.
Yeah.
That there's 3 films I saw. There's 3 particular films I saw in the early 2000s that made me think I can make work again.
Yeah.
And one was Ernie Gare's Glider. The other was Ken Jacobs' Capitalism, Child Labor. Capitalism, Child Labor.
Yeah.
And the third one was a work by Victor Bergen called Hotel Berlin. And they're 3 very, very different films.
Yeah.
But it made me understand that digital video has a kind of a flexibility
Yeah.
that analog video never had for me, or I didn't know how to work with it. And so those 3, and I thank those 3 individuals personally, were my mind exploded with ideas. I saw all 3 of them more or less about the same time, and it really totally inspired me to start working again.
So we take the points and one or 2 questions about your theoretical work, and if you spoke now about the digital image. If you could say one or two words from your book, you say there is a trilogy.
Right.
The last three. So the first one, the virtual live of film, and you speak about on French is event numérique. In English is
the digital event is a section. Yes, it's a section in virtual life of film.
Yes. You're speaking. You just spoke about a digital event in your work. And if you could speak a little about the book, the virtual life of film, and the digital event.
Yeah, it's funny. I can't promise it's going to happen, but I have an idea. I have a collection of essays I've written since the virtual life of film. That if I do put them together, the working title is The Digital Event.
Yeah.
And because my thinking about that has changed quite a bit.
Yeah.
When I wrote Virtual Life of Film, The Digital Event, I'm writing mostly about Sokharov's Russian Ark.
Yeah.
Which is a film that pretends to be a 90-minute continuous tape.
Yes, there's some framing.
Yeah, but my point is that the film, which is, let me back up and say, for me the problem with Russian Ark, even though I like the film, is that it wants to be a 90-minute film.
Yeah.
What it is a 90-minute digital work. And it becomes that because there is so much compositing. So there's not just montage, the montage of a long take, but there's montage like this, right, through the image. And to me, that really affects one's both feeling and understanding of time relationships in the film.
Yeah.
Something that Sokharov doesn't own up to. He wants it to be as if it were a 90-minute long take in film.
Yeah.
But
Bazanian.
Yes. But and it doesn't detract from the film to say it's because it's dealing with time in the most interesting way.
Yeah.
But it's not talking to Sokharov with his wonderful cinematographer where you're going to get that.
Yeah.
And that opens up the whole question for me, because there was the concept of the digital event is at a crossroads of a place where my thinking has really changed. Because when I started writing The Virtual Life of Film, I remember giving a talk at the Photographers Gallery in London.
Yeah.
And one of the morals of my talk was to say that I don't think there's a digital time image.
Yeah.
That the digital just cannot express duration as a kind of deep phenomenological duration in the same way as film. And one sees that argument in the middle part of Virtual Life of Film. I've changed my mind entirely about that.
I'm really glad to know,
and so it's
I felt when reading your book.
And part of it had to do with seeing these films I was talking about by Ernie Gare and Ken Jacobs and Victor Bergen, was just understanding that yet again the artists are kind of smarter than the philosophers. They've already worked out these problems in interesting ways. And so these essays, I mean, my Harun Farokhi talk will be part of that book if it becomes a book. Is looking at closely at various pieces of contemporary art, works of contemporary art, which are really kind of pushing and exploring conceptually. I don't want to make it just totally Deleuzian, but as you know, I'm interested in time. And I'm interested in how the moving image works, try to express or problematize or test or interrogate different time relationships. So
that sounds very interesting. And time is something very strong today in film theory and film. And I mean, I think each period has its subject. I mean, in the 70s, and the 80s, and the 90s, and I feel that I'm not saying that this is the subject, but we can't think about cinema today without And one last question: your last two words, your last two works, Elegy for Theory and Philosophy's Artful Conversation. So you make a very interesting differentiation, or not differentiation, because I see that you oscillate a lot between theory and philosophy. Even the name Elegy, you say that, no, I want to use the éloge.
Yeah, French word. Éloge de la théorie. Yeah.
Éloge de théorie. But anyway, there is something that you want to pull from theory and you want to pull to philosophy. I think it's a very interesting movement, and also it's a very interesting way of dealing with two traditions: the analytical tradition, the American philosophy, Thoreau, Emerson, Carroll, and the hard epistemological theory, and the other way, the phenomenology, the Husserl, Heidegger, Merleau-Ponty, and post-structuralism. So, if you say two words about these two fields that you try to get them.
Well, it will be more than two words. But I think I can talk about my argument very straightforwardly. I mean, in terms of the debates that we were having, say, in the 1990s when Bordwell and Carroll's Post-Theory book came out, to me, that the first problem was, and that was in the middle of all kinds of arguments about anti-theory, against theory, what is this theory that everyone's so upset about? And I mean, the first problem is, from analytic philosophy, they're not gesturing towards theory. They want to be science, right? So there's a relationship between theory and science. And then there's the question of, what is theory? I mean, all these, in all these debates from the 80s to the 90s that people were having about theory, no one had a clear idea of what it is they were against. There was no way of having a real debate about that. There was no clarity to it. And so point number one is that, and this is what Elegy for Theory is about, is to say that, my discovery that from the 4th century BC, theory was already a highly variable and contested term. In tension with science on the one hand and philosophy on the other. And as you go through different epistems, I guess I would call them. Theory is just like there's a virtual life of film, there's a virtual life of theory. It's dynamic, it's changing, it takes on certain cultural values, it loses them, it takes on others. And so the first thing I wanted to do is to just give a more concrete sense of all that has been at stake in this term. Not that I can sit down now and say there are 10 points that define theory. But the second part of the question